Surrounded by jungle and watched from every direction by the enemy, this firebase would prove to be a nightmare for the brave men sent to defend it. It was shelled, probed, and attacked over and over. By the time the fighting ended, 75 men were lost. What happened there was not a single battle, but weeks of unrelenting hardship, pressure, fear, and endurance that few who survived would ever forget.
The jungle lay silent that morning, unnervingly still, as if it had forgotten how to breathe. In war, quiet was never a comfort, it was a warning. From beyond the ridge came a low, rhythmic pulse, rotor blades slicing through mist and mountain air. Moments later, a helicopter rose above the tree line, banking over a bald hill surrounded by miles of green. That hill was firebase Ripcord. By the end of July 1970, it would be remembered as one of the most brutal, least-known battles of the Vietnam War. At that time, Ripcord was little more than a mark on a map, another firebase under reconstruction in the Ashore Valley, a stretch of land the Americans had nicknamed Death Valley. Official reports called it routine. In reality, it was a match waiting for a spark. A few hundred men from the 101st Airborne Division were sent to re-establish the base. They built bunkers, dug trenches, and stacked sandbags beneath the distant echo of artillery. Most were barely out of high school, running on exhaustion and habit, counting the days until their rotation home. They didn't know that North Vietnamese army eyes were on them the entire time. Hidden in the dense valley below, thousands of enemy troops were preparing for a siege. Every ridge concealed gun positions. Every jungle path was lined with tripwires. Even as the Americans worked, their movements were being recorded, each landing, each supply run, each perimeter shift. Command believed the mission would be limited and brief, a few weeks at most. But soon, strange signs began to surface. Radio intercepts revealed unusual patterns. Night patrols returned with stories of footprints, dozens at first, then hundreds. On the 10th night, a single flare rose into the sky, red and white light shimmering across the valley. It drifted down slowly, then vanished. At dawn, one soldier finally said what everyone had begun to suspect. "We're being watched." Ripcord was no longer just an outpost, it was a target. The first shell landed shortly after sunrise, one sharp explosion that shattered the morning calm. Then another. Then dozens more. In seconds, the hill erupted under a barrage of mortar and rocket fire. Explosions crept up the slopes like thunder marching uphill. Men dove for half-finished bunkers, choking on dust and smoke. The sky went black with debris. Across the valley, enemy artillery batteries fired in perfect rhythm. They had spent weeks preparing for this exact moment. Every trajectory had been plotted, every gun zeroed in. Medics hauled the wounded into foxholes, their ears ringing from the blasts. Machine gunners sprayed the tree line blindly, firing at an unseen enemy. Helicopters tried to break through the smoke with supplies and ammunition. The first made it. The second didn't. Tracers caught its tail, and it spun out of control, bursting into flames before it hit the ground. From that moment on, Ripcord was cut off. 200 men faced an enemy 10 times their number. The jungle glowed orange from explosions. The air hung heavy with dust, diesel, and blood. Every call for reinforcements was met with silence or static. Every helicopter that approached was torn apart before it could land. Still, no one talked about retreat. The 101st had its reputation and its pride. They dug in deeper, fired until their barrels glowed red, and waited for the next assault. Within a week, firebase Ripcord had been turned into a cratered wasteland. Every bunker was shredded. The men lived in the holes they dug themselves. Each day brought mortar fire before dawn, rockets at noon, snipers after sunset. Sleep vanished. There was no day, no night, only explosions. Helicopter pilots began calling it the meat grinder. Dozens of aircraft were shot down trying to reach the base. Those that managed to land hovered inches above the ground, one skid touching dirt as soldiers threw ammo and bodies aboard before takeoff. By the 10th day, water and ammunition were almost gone. The men collected rain in helmets, and still, no one spoke the word surrender. At night, the MVA came in waves, screaming through the wire, throwing grenades and satchel charges. The Americans fought them off with claymores and rifles, hand to hand in some places. When dawn came, the bodies lay twisted in the wire, the ground steaming from the heat. Reinforcements never arrived, and by then, no one expected them to. For 23 days, the defenders of Ripcord held the line, outnumbered 10-1, bombarded without rest, surviving only through grit and loyalty. They had long since accepted what most refused to say aloud. They were already in hell. But they weren't going to give up. By the third week, Ripcord had become a scar on the earth. The once green hill was now blackened, stripped of trees, and drowned in smoke. Those still standing were ghosts of themselves, hollow-eyed, filthy, running on adrenaline and instinct. Their uniforms were soaked with rain, their hands blistered from digging, their ears deafened by endless shell fire. Every sound could be the last thing they heard. Every movement meant death might be seconds away. The jungle around them had turned to ash and wire. Ripcord wasn't a base anymore. It was a wound that refused to close. When the order finally came, evacuate Ripcord, disbelief swept the battered hill. They had fought too long and lost too much to simply give it up. But command had made its decision. The position could no longer be held. For some, the order felt like relief. For others, it felt like a bitter betrayal. Either way, it meant one thing: they had to leave those they could not carry behind. The first helicopters came in low, rotors chopping through the smoke. Pilots hovered as soldiers hauled the wounded aboard. Trace of fire streaked the sky. Aircraft were struck and fell into the valley below. The air filled with shouted orders and the steady drum of small arms. Small groups remained to cover the withdrawal, firing until their magazines were empty. No one wanted to be the last person off the hill, but someone always was. As the final aircraft lifted, a few defenders kept firing to protect it. Then they ran and leapt for the skids while heavy fire tore across the landing zone. The helicopter climbed through smoke and tracer light. Below, Ripcord was swallowed by flames and dust. Minutes later, friendly artillery opened up from miles away. Every available battery fired on the hill. The ground shook for hours. When it was over, there was nothing left of the base. No bunkers, no sandbags, no trace of the outpost. Only blackened earth and an uneasy silence. When the sounds of battle faded, the hill known as Ripcord fell quiet. What had once been a busy outpost was now still, its purpose complete. In the days that followed, units were withdrawn and the area returned to silence. Records showed that the mission had demanded enormous effort and endurance from everyone involved. Though little was said about it at the time, the experience left a lasting impression on those who served there. For them, Ripcord became more than a name. It was a symbol of dedication and resilience in one of the most demanding environments of the war. Even after the base itself was gone, its story continued in memories, journals, and quiet conversations among veterans. Ripcord remains a reminder of how determination and unity can endure through even the hardest moments.